If you're like me, you probably came to know about pirates through pop culture or the book Treasure Island. Black Flag was the game that encouraged you to live out your pirate dreams. In fact, Ubisoft is finally remaking Black Flag, but let's be real, only because they saw this other game doing so well. Newer pirate games like Windrose, and Sea of Thieves, mind you, have tapped into the pirate fantasy and given it to us in a way that appeals to us. You know what I'm saying? You get your crew together, you get the boys together, or if you're like me, I play with my wife because I love my wife, so we play all of our games together as well. But together, all of us are building ships, surviving the sea, chasing booty, doing naval battles, living outside of the normal structure of society, and all of that pirate life feels like it was made just for games. Oh, and what about Captain Jack Sparrow? He is the pirate. Except he's not. Because there's something people almost never talk about. The real history of piracy. It's much uglier than the myths. Even if you don't exactly know what it is, you've probably heard of the golden age of piracy. So now you're probably thinking, he's right. What exactly was that? Well, my straw-hatted subscriber, the golden age of pirates was a period built out of a bunch of different factors. War, empires, poverty, legal loopholes, brutal violence, and governments that were perfectly willing to use sea raiders when it helped them, but then hang those same men when they had become too bad for business. So the first thing to understand is that the real pirates were criminals. Their raids could involve torture, murder, hostage-taking, theft, and intimidation, but killing everybody on board was actually usually a detriment to their bottom line. A surrendered ship was worth way more than a ruined one. However, there is a second thing that you also need to know about pirates: notoriety. A black flag, a famous name, and stories about what happened to the crews that resisted could cripple a target before the first cannon even fired. Blackbeard understood this better than almost anyone, which is why he purposely went out of his way to have such a reputation. Because if sailors already believed that he was a nightmare before he even reached their ship, surrender then became the safer option, and for pirates like Blackbeard, that made his job easier. Except, it didn't. Because that was actually a double-edged sword, as it also made them harder for the governments to ignore. Because piracy was tied to money from the very beginning. So, here's the point where I tell you about the difference between a pirate and a privateer. A pirate attacked ships illegally. A privateer did the same thing, but with government permission, usually through a document called a letter of marque, which allowed private ships to attack enemy vessels during wartime. So yeah, any man could raid ships, steal cargo, and plunder coastal towns, but if he did so under government authority, he would be treated as a servant of the crown, whereas if he did it without permission, he would instead be treated as a criminal and hanged. Now here's the thing. European governments thought that privateering was a bright idea, and for a while it was. During wars like the War of the Spanish Succession, they could give private sailors permission to attack enemy ships instead of having to rely only on official navies. This was brilliant, or so they thought, because their system created a problem nobody had fully planned for. After the Treaty of Utrecht in 1713, the war ended. As a result, many private sailors lost their legal work. Well, guess what? They still needed money. What skills did they have? What did they know? What had they spent years being rewarded for? Raiding ships. Oh, they knew life at the sea like the back of their knees. They knew the routes, they knew how to fight, they knew how to board ships, they knew which cargo was worth taking, and they knew how much wealth was moving across the Atlantic. So when the legal version of sea raiding was no longer feasible, the illegal version became a lot easier to imagine. Enter the golden age of pirates. This is the era that most people are picturing when they imagine a classic pirate's world. The golden age stretched from the late 1600s into the early 1700s, with the biggest surge happening after 1713. That post-war world gave piracy exactly what it needed: experienced sailors, weak enforcement, and trade routes full of plunder. This was the Atlantic economy, and it covered so much distance that no empire could fully protect it. Pirates took advantage of this. Merchant ships obviously carried valuable cargo, but many of them were not outfitted well enough to defend themselves against raids. Governments were aware of this issue, and they wanted to secure their trade routes, but the colonies were too far apart, and naval patrols could not be everywhere at once. So naturally, the pirates exploited this. The Caribbean became one of the main centers for piracy because it had everything that they needed. But what else? Let's take this even further. Why else was the Caribbean such an asset to pirates? You see, a pirate crew needed targets, yes, but it also needed places to repair their ships, to take on supplies, recruit men, and disappear when somebody came looking for them. The Golden Age spread across different regions at different times. The earlier buccaneers operated out of places like Port Royal and Tortuga, attacking Spanish ships and colonies, but later, pirates pushed along the Atlantic coast and deeper into the Caribbean, where Nassau became one of the most important pirate bases ever. Others sailed into the Indian Ocean and the Red Sea, where wealthy Mughal ships and pilgrim vessels became major targets. The pirates were following the money. Wherever trade was rich and protection was thin, piracy had room to grow. That is where Nassau comes in. The Pirates' Republic. Location, location, location. New Providence was an island in the Bahamas, and Nassau was one of the most important pirate bases in the Atlantic. Its location gave pirates a staggering advantage. It was situated close to busy shipping routes, the surrounding waters were difficult for larger naval ships to move through, and British authority there was weak enough that the pirates could operate with very little interference. Nassau was the solution for pirates, where they could get organized, but above all of that, they could be amongst like-minded individuals. You see, Nassau gave pirates something that scattered crews usually did not have: a community. By the early 1700s, New Providence had become this gathering place away from the British Empire. Now hold on, low-key I'm making this sound nice, right? You're thinking, oh, well, that does seem like a really good vision of freedom in a rebel society. But hold on to that thought, because this is where history gets complicated. Some of pirate fantasy does pull from something real. On pirate ships, life could be very different from what sailors experienced on merchants or naval vessels. Captains were often elected, crews could vote on major decisions, loot was divided by agreed shares, some pirate codes included compensation for injuries. A pirate who had lost his eye, hand, or leg in battle could receive payments from the crew's plunder. But that did not make pirates good people. You gotta understand that they were still doing harm and being violent. But you also have to see their point of view for a bit. Why did they turn to a life of crime? Well, it goes back to the difference between being a privateer and a pirate. A regular, legal sailor who had spent years dealing with brutal discipline, terrible pay, and captains who could have them beaten for minor offenses, a pirate ship seemed like a pretty good deal. It seemed like the better deal. More money, more agency, and mutiny was always an option if enough of the crew decided that they didn't like their captain. To some of these men, piracy offered a level of control that they were never going to get in legal maritime life. However, it is Nassau that allowed that pirate life to reach the levels that it did. And once Nassau became pirate central, the famous names started popping up, and they could not be ignored. They would not be ignored. The first one is obviously Blackbeard. By 1718, his reputation was not just helping him to take more ships, it was turning him into public enemy number one. But what exactly did he do? Was there anything in specific that he did that made him stand out above all the other pirates? Well, Edward Teach, better known as Blackbeard, once trapped Charleston, South Carolina, by stopping ships from moving in and out of the harbor. Think about that. He held Charleston hostage. He seized vehicles, took prisoners, demanded medical supplies, and then he sailed away once he got what he wanted. And by effect, this showed colonial authorities that he could shut down one of their ports without even needing to set foot in the city, and there was nothing that they could do about it. He embarrassed, maybe even humiliated the British colonial authorities, and all the man did was orofarm on his ship. But that kind of attention did come with a cost. Later that same year, Blackbeard was killed in a fight against Lieutenant Robert Maynard. The battle became part of the legend because of how violent it was, with Blackbeard reportedly taking multiple wounds before he would finally die. Maynard would then cut his head off and hung it off of the bow of his ship, partly as proof, partly as a warning. You see, Blackbeard had spent his entire career using fear against other people, and after his death, the government used his body in the same way. Bartholomew Roberts, also known as Black Bart. Not that Black Bart. He doesn't happen for another 150 years. Here we go. This Black Bart. So why was this pirate a legend? In only a few years, Roberts captured hundreds of ships raiding across the Atlantic, Caribbean, and the west coast of Africa. And this was massively in part due to his crew. They had strong discipline, written rules, and a clear structure for how life on board worked. Roberts showed that piracy could be organized enough to disrupt several trade routes all at once. And then, of course, we can't not mention that you got Anne Bonny and Mary Read, who became two of the most famous documented female pirates of the Golden Age, and their story obviously became well known because they cut against the usual image of piracy as an entirely male-dominated world. Now, their careers were short, but when Calico Jack's crew was captured in Jamaica in 1720, they were tried along the men. Except, they both avoided immediate execution because they were pregnant.
We're pregnant! Do you all hear that?
What the devil did she say?
They plead their bellies, my lord.
Aye, you can't hang a woman quick with child, can ye?
Quiet! Quiet! If what you claim is true, then your executions will be stayed, but only until your terms are up.
Then I'll be up the duff the next time you come knocking.
And let me tell you about Samuel Bellamy, also known as Black Sam, because he showed how fast a pirate career could rise and fall. I keep wanting to say 1738, but in 1717, he captured the Widow, a heavily armed slave ship carrying a huge fortune, and he made it his flagship. This one prize made him one of the wealthiest pirates of the era, but he barely had time to enjoy it. The Widow wrecked in a storm off Cape Cod that same year, killing Bellamy and most of his crew. So you can see how piracy might be able to make a man rich quickly, but then again, the ocean doesn't give a flying duck. These pirates, these names, became the type that you name drinks after, going out in a blaze of glory. However, at the time, they were actually evidence that piracy had grown beyond scattered crime. And this all circles back to Nassau. Are you guys seeing where this is going? Are you guys picking up what I'm putting down? Are you guys tracking like a tank? Alright, here we go. A hidden pirate crew was hard to pin down, but an entire pirate base was not. By 1718, the British had decided that Nassau could not keep operating. So what did they do? They sent Governor Woodes Rogers with royal authority, warships, and a king's pardon for pirates willing to surrender. So picture this. He pulls up to Nassau, and remember, he's not alone here. There are multiple warships with him. But he tells them, hey, if you guys want, you can give up and return to legal life and you'll be fine. However, anybody who refuses is going to be treated as an enemy of the crown. Of course, this worked. But the pardon only worked because it came with the force behind it. Because pretty soon, naval patrols increased. Pirate hunters became more active. Colonial courts became faster at trying and executing captured pirates. And this was done by the Act for the More Effectual Suppression of Piracy, also known as the Piracy Act of 1698, basically a British anti-piracy law that made it easier to prosecute pirates overseas. Instead of dragging those pirates all the way back to England, special courts could try them in the colonies, which made punishment quicker, cheaper, and much harder to escape from. It got to the point where piracy became a worse gamble, and that was the real shift. Earlier, pirates could survive because systems around them had space for it, but after 1718, with the crackdown, that space started to close. Officials were less than willing now to look away. Merchants had more reason to avoid pirate goods. Safe ports became harder to rely on. A pirate crew might win a fight, but surviving after the fight became harder and harder every year. And then you had the Pirate Kings getting hunted down one by one. Pirate Kings, by the way, is not an official title, I just thought it sounded cool. But once the legends started to fall, the common pirates underneath them had fewer people to follow, fewer reasons to believe the old world was still there. The golden age of pirates was mostly dismantled by the 1720s, but the pirate image did not die with the men who were hanged, shot, or forced back into the life of a law-abiding citizen. If anything, that is when the version most of us recognize started being built. A general history of the pirates came out in 1724 and helped to turn real pirates into larger-than-life figures almost immediately. And later, Treasure Island pushed that image even further with treasure maps, hidden gold, rough crews, and the idea of the pirates as dangerous but exciting. Over time, fiction kept the parts that people wanted. But as always, real history gives us the ugly truth. And yet, even when we know the brutal reality, a part of us still understands the appeal of looking at that silver line on the sea and imagining even for a second that we could be the captains of a ship, telling our crew to
Bring me that horizon.